Coming up on this episode of the Prompt First Ask Later podcast.
What we are seeing right now as of this recording is that there's like a one-up AI tool that's coming out every hour of every day. And if you find yourself on social media, on Twitter or on LinkedIn, and you found yourself in the AI corners, there's no shortage of new tools and new ideas and, what I call hype that's coming out on an hourly basis.
Hey, it's the AI guys from Spej, and it's another episode of Prompt First, Ask Later podcast. And we like to say, AI moves fast, we move faster, and so we want to welcome you back to our podcast. So today, wanted to talk a little bit about something that I feel literally every one of our listeners and viewers are dealing with, and that's AI tools. Everybody's talking about what AI tool they use, and so I thought we'd title this episode, Your AI Stack. Stop collecting tools and start getting results. And so before we really get into this, so show me a nod of the head or raising of the hands, if you will. How many of you guys have or are paying for some AI tools right now that maybe you haven't used in quite a while? Anybody ever done that? So I think that's why we're here today. When it comes to AI tools, I'm not going to talk about here's what's coming, that type of thing, but here's what to actually do this week in a kind of a way of what we want people to do and what we want to do to put this into practice. I'm going to ask you guys a question, and I think that if we could get some real down-to-earth answers, it'll really help a lot of people. Let's start with something that you would say, or I would say would be maybe a shiny object phase in AI tools. A tool like, how bad did it get before you really realized, well, that tool's really not for me, or I had a really bad experience with that?
What we are seeing right now as of this recording is that there's like a one-up AI tool that's coming out every hour of every day. And if you find yourself on social media, on Twitter or on LinkedIn, and you found yourself in the AI corners, there's no shortage of new tools and new ideas and what I call hype that's coming out on an hourly basis. And it's even tough for us. And all of us here, we're on the bleeding edge of AI. We talk about this stuff every hour of every day. It's really exciting. But one thing that's been tough for me as a content creator has been this need to use AI video generation tools. It's an interesting concept. And I know lots of people may be really bullish on it. But for me personally, I just never got traction. And I enjoy the process of creating content. I like being in front of a camera. To replicate that with an AI avatar to try to do it better than I can, I think is a little bit tough. I think the tools are very capable, but I just haven't been able to find traction. And there's a couple of tools that I have that have been being, they're paid for, but I haven't been utilizing them. And I'm like, I'll get to it. It just hasn't happened. So for me, it's like these video AI tools, Ken, that just haven't found traction for me.
I was thinking, and certainly don't want to name tools that I thought were super helpful in the beginning. But what I find personally, what's happening is that there's a lot of niche tools that were created for a specific reason. I can think of, there's a popular tool for a lot of helping create some of the presentations, PowerPoints, that kind of just helps you align to the best way as you think through the storyline. And I think it was initially a very extremely helpful tool. But what happened is that the big LLMs actually came up with, I would say, an equally good product to where that tool just became redundant. And so that's why I'm seeing a lot. And I'm sure a lot of folks are using tools are seeing where it seems like every week Anthropic or ChatGPT or someone announces, hey, we now have this integration. We have now this integration. And they overnight kill a product of tools.
Right.
And if you're on that ecosystem already, if you are using Gemini or using Anthropic, Claude, Grok, whatever, it just makes it no brainer to keep using the ecosystem in it. And so I found that now in the same token, I've unsubscribed from some paid LLMs because I felt that they weren't producing as much value as other ones. So that's my general thought, is that any tool that's been out there for a very long time, I advise listeners to check in if your big LLMs may have already created something that does the same thing, and you can save some bucks.
I think one that I used to use, this popular flow charting tool, they added AI capabilities to it a little bit too late. But like Alex is saying, I do all this stuff now using mostly Claude. It does most of the things I needed to do. And it does it faster and better than I could inside those tools. So that's the one. And then I know what tool you're talking about, Alex. The same thing happened with that one as well.
Yeah. When we talk about AI tools, there's a big phrase right now that I've heard a lot of you guys mention a lot in some of our client calls as well as individuals, and that's an AI stack. So what is an AI stack for somebody that's just joining us that has no clue about it?
So I'll say that from what I believe to be the stack is kind of deciding what is the tools you're using. Right? From the most basic, what is your layer, kind of like layering cake? What are you using? You're using what's your storage, where you use your processing, and what kind of LLM you're using, and what may be some of the security tools. So that's, to me, as a stack, is essentially meaning what products are you using to create your items. You're either going to be either hosted on AWS, or you're going to be using another service. You're either going to be using LLM XYZ or LLM this. You can have a multitude of them, but usually stack means your infrastructural baseline, I would call it, that you leverage.
I think for stack, it depends on what you do. So for me, primarily, I'm building things, building applications. And so for me, my stack is centered around that primarily. So Claude Code right now is my go-to. I use that all the time. I use it inside Cursor. So Cursor has its own AI, and I use them together, one to test the other, and sometimes to sort of pair program too, which I find to be really helpful. Cursor as well, for developers, it has the ability to control your browser. And so I use that to automate tests, which is really super helpful. And then for where we deploy stuff, we use Supabase and Vercel a lot of times. And I have those plugged into GitHub as well. So they do code reviews for me. They're looking for safe code execution and different kinds of threats. And so that's what I use for my stack.
When I think about stack, ditto to what Alex and Sean had mentioned, there's obviously the decision you have to make around what type of AI model you want to use. There are publicly available models like Claude, Gemini, OpenAI, and Grok. There are open source models that also exist that give you varying levels of intelligence that you can run locally, as long as the hardware that you have can support it. So there's absolutely, part of the stack is going to be the model. What's going to drive that? Secondly, it's essentially the infrastructure. Where is this model running? Is it in the cloud on Claude.ai? Is it Claude locally on your desktop? Do you have an OpenClaw configuration running on a Mac Mini? Seems to be getting a lot of buzz right now as well. And the infrastructure piece is really where the AI can exist and interact with different parts of things that you need to execute on. And then I think there's also like a data element. They're using GitHub for a repository. And for the non-technical folks, it's a centralized storage location for your code, so that when you have AI running, it can access different pieces of information to execute. Are you using a OneDrive or a Google Drive or a SharePoint and storing documents or other relevant information that the AI can access in order for things to happen? Are you using connectors through API or MCP, where you can access other ancillary SaaS services? So I think the stack goes well beyond just model selection. It goes well beyond infrastructure selection. It's like thinking about a first aid kit that you have. You're not only going to carry the first aid kit with Band-Aids, you're going to have gauze and scissors and gloves and other things that help you execute on an injury process. Or you may have a toolkit that has a wrench, pliers, hammer, screwdrivers, a drill. And what Anthropic and Google and all these other AI companies are attempting to do is build the entire toolkit, so you don't have to get a hammer and a screwdriver from somebody else. You get it all in one place. And so there's this convergence of utility that's emerging. So Ken, my prediction is your AI stack is going to consolidate and compress to maybe just a handful of different providers. And that's why they're rushing and spending hundreds of billions of dollars, because they're the ones that want to capture all that. So from an AI stack perspective, it's really exciting. And I post a lot about this on LinkedIn. My stack used to be huge. And slowly but surely, when the frontier lab companies like Anthropic or Google, when they're releasing new things, there's this joke that 1,000 other AI startups just get crushed when that happens. And that's a reality. So ditto to what Alex said on the presentation tool, and ditto to what Sean is saying on using Frontier Lab tools, because I think a compressed stack creates efficiency and just the ability to move a lot faster.
I think there's a 4-layer process that people need to consider when they're looking at their tool that they're going to use. You have your capture tool that you're going to use. You have a process tool. You have a create and an automate tool. And like you said, a lot of these tools now are combining all these 4 processes into one particular product that a lot of people can utilize instead of having a whole toolbox full of tools that we used to have to get these processes going. Let's talk to somebody right now that, like me, for example, or somebody that's just getting into using a lot of AI, and maybe they just use one, say ChatGPT, or they use Copilot or whatever it might be. Which layer from those 4 layers are they missing with just using something as basic as those simple tools? Is there anything that they're missing that they should explore as they build an AI stack, so to speak?
I think the most important thing, Ken, and for all the listeners out there, is the ability to go multimodal with these AI tools and the AI stack. Most of you that are watching use a single modality of AI tools. What is a modality? A modality is the way in which you interact with the AI tool of choice. Multimodal tools can interact in multiple ways. So they could do it via text. You have a chat interface, or on your mobile phone, you have an app. You chat in text, and the AI does inference when it responds back to you in text as well. So that's a text modality. You can also use voice modality, where you talk to the AI and it can either inference back in text or it can inference back to you in voice. Anthropic recently released their voice-to-voice modality, which I think is super interesting. You can do picture or image-based modality. Gemini is really good at this with Nano Banana. You can go in and create images of things. So you can put in an image of yourself and say, put Sagar in a Batman costume with the Chicago skyline behind him. And Gemini will come back and create that image. You can do video modality, where AI tools can now use your local camera on your mobile device on an iOS or Android, and it can see the world in front of you and explain things. So I think there's this massive opportunity for people, both in their personal life, to use multimodal capabilities. We're starting to now see this also on the professional business end, where companies are leveraging other modalities to help do things that just were not possible just a year or two ago. So
Sure.
Can I say that multimodal capabilities are going to be extremely important to get more value out of basic text-to-text interactions on these tools?
I would say look into Notebook LM if you haven't played around with that, especially if you're in the business, you're planning or having any sort of like business meeting where you need to make decisions. It can do quite a bit just from a whiteboard drawing and a conversation, anywhere from building those slide decks that we talked about earlier to coming up with podcast content. It's really crazy what it can do. I would say if you're just like a ChatGPT user or something like that, check out Notebook LM because it has that multimodal capabilities that Sagar's talking about. It can do quite a bit for you. That would be my advice.
I would pivot this a little bit differently and just say that as we talk about the stack, one of the things that some of the users may be seeing when they're leveraging, an online based LLM is that you probably are noticing where you type in something and you say, hey, create me an image or create me a deck. And it lives inside that context window. When you're trying to use it for, let's say, for a business and you wanted to expand this out and absorb large sets of data or have it on a automation process, that's going to be a limitation for you in leveraging that interface online, going through your business account or your personal account, whichever it may be. So this is where you would need to connect with, have your own, database, have your own output, a little more work. That's something that companies like Spej do, but that's one of the, if you think about the layering, that would be an example where we would layer, a database and ensure that all the output goes into a particular folder or space. Because personally, when I use it, I always tend to load up my content window and I get frustrated because then it times out. There's limitations on how much you can put into a specific one. And I know there's a lot of talk about limits that you have on the amount of data you can actually put in there, because there are limitations, how much you can process per minute, how much it can take. And so that's where you gotta think through, and if you want to use it in a more sophisticated, advanced way, and then you have to configure it with some assistance.
As I'm looking at our group here on this podcast, I'm looking at 4 distinct, different personalities and lifestyles. And I really, and that's not bad. That's great, because we need that. We need diversity. So talk a little bit. Let's dive into talking about how our AI stack, if you will, or the tools that we use can play into our personalities. Because for me, I'm into audio and visual stuff and working on putting audio things together and putting podcasts together. But not only that, but using some of the AI tools to do research to help me to build projects and different things like that. Sagar and Sean and Alex, I know all of you have different personalities and different ways that you're using the tools based on your personality. Would you agree or disagree?
I mean, definitely. I mean, I use it I teach a class, and so I will use it a lot of times to like give me a basic summary, like a 1-pager for my students. And, and I don't just like fire and forget with it. I just use it to create the basics, and then I'll fill it in.
Yeah.
But it saves me a whole lot of time for tasks like that. It's not something I do professionally for Spej or anything, but but it does make a big difference in time and quality, and it's a better writer than I am. So I use it that way, which is, I think our education system's going to be coming along here pretty soon with this stuff. So hopefully.
For me, being a yapper that I am, yapping on social media, on calls, on podcasts, what has been extremely helpful for me are these AI note takers, because it allows me to focus on the conversation. I don't have to spend time writing down notes. I still take a lot of mental notes, a pretty sharp memory. But what the AI transcription does for me is it gives me a second look and allows me to chat with the meetings and the conversations.
Do you ever find yourself when you're not using a note taker and you're talking with somebody and you're thinking in the back of your mind, oh, I don't have to remember all these details because I've got my note taker going. I've done that so many times. And then when I get done with the conversation and I need to remember something, I don't have the note taker notes that I can go back to.
No, I do, man. And I think that's becoming a problem because we used to have to concentrate a lot deeper. And especially on the calls that 45 to an hour, there's a bunch of topics that you're flipping through. And there's no way you're going to remember what was said at minute 7 versus what was said at minute 57. So absolutely, I think the overuse of AI is now conditioning our brains to act very differently. And I would argue, are you really paying attention in the long term and instead focusing on what's in front of you? And is that necessarily a bad thing? Because then you're more present in the dialogue, you're more connected to the conversation. But we all know when we're on calls, there's task list, to-dos, and other things that have to get done. And if you don't have either a solid mental note of everything or something written down or an AI note taker, which you see them everywhere. Sometimes there's meetings where there's more bots than there are people. Overuse of it is not great. But for me as a yapper, it has absolutely 10x'd my ability to be extremely thoughtful about post-meeting execution that needs to happen that I'm not great at it, and I need support on that. So that's been an unlock for me, is to be able to do that.
We had one client who sometimes would not show up to meetings, but his bot would. So we would tell it jokes for the first couple minutes, and then we would know later if he actually looked at the transcription or if you got the joke.
That's
so funny. There was one that I saw a recent advertisement. I honestly don't remember the tool, but essentially I'm guessing it uses like Notebook LM or something like that, which studies your image, your mimic, and it will actually dial in for you into the meetings. Here is you. It will nod the head. It will come in and say yes. It will have some basic prompts. It's meant for, those 40, 50 people meetings that you might not have a big role in, where it just sends you off, collects the meeting notes, and it makes it look like you were present there.
Oh my gosh, I wish I had that like 4 years ago.
I know. Tests are they can break, but
yeah, I have 5 fingers, not 6.
Yeah, five fingers.
Fingers in front. That's how you tell if it's an AI bot. Tell someone to do this.
But
the 2 fingers.
Somebody spent my first early career in consulting, and doing a lot of time dedicated towards those, and also being a note taker, quite frankly, my earlier career in some of the meetings, to now think about that, your junior consultants don't have to sit there and type 1,000 words a minute is kind of mind blowing. And honestly, it's not a particular memory that I have fond memories of doing that. So yeah, I think note taking has been revolutionary. I think that it is something that is going to be very difficult for folks to kind of go back. I do think, to Sagar's point, when we have live meetings is where I think people are going to run into problems, because they may not run transcription and they're like, what the heck was this meeting about, if they're not recording. And then lastly for me is just crazy amount of time to spend in Excel in my earlier career, and find myself sometimes sitting there watching YouTube videos, Googling how to create this particular pivot table and this formula, and playing around with it, to now just, I don't even ask that formula. I just ask for it to create it. It's revolutionary.
I was looking at in a meeting we had today where you were showing a spreadsheet, and I noticed in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, you had a tool, an AI tool that's linked to your spreadsheet that I'm sure that you use quite frequently. And a lot of people are using that. There was the cloud symbol that you had in the upper right corner. And how has that changed what you're doing with Excel?
So I just recently actually installed the add-on. I haven't played much in that, but it's also just as the name suggests, you tell it what you want to create and it will do it in Excel, as opposed to going into a Claude and saying, hey, create me this spreadsheet that does XYZ. You're now able to just do it straight in Excel. So it's a new feature. I haven't played with that as much, Ken, but I have created, some basic modeling and even more complex modeling when we think about, for example, how much tokens is going to be consumed in this particular exercise. I can use AI modeling in Claude or ChatGPT to create me the spreadsheet that has all the formulas in there, versus before, that would be a 3-4 hour exercise creating that from scratch. So I think there's a lot more to it. I'm looking to expand on that more, but the question I would pose is that I think soon enough we won't be even looking at Excel spreadsheets, because the agents are just going to be connecting with each other and validating some of the information. So I think that's going to be, down the road, where I actually think that we will be even less in the spreadsheets, because the validations are going to be done by AI or by the agent proxies. So that would be an interesting time.
So we're running into a danger zone. And this can be a controversial subject, since we deal with AI products each and every day and we want to help people use it. But are we running into a danger zone? Because I remember before I had a cell phone, I had dozens and dozens of telephone numbers memorized. And I knew what number I could call if I was calling my mom or my dad or my brothers or sisters. I had those memorized. And now I don't have to memorize it, because it's all in this device that I'm using. And Sagar, I think you touched on it earlier, where we were talking about having a lot of things that we used to have in our memory that we don't have anymore, because we don't have to do it. We've got tools like this that will help us to remember, help us to figure out things, or to have important information stored somewhere. But I mean, in your opinion, is there a danger in overutilizing these tools that we have today?
The first thing that comes to mind is yes, and it's critical thinking. We now have people that over-rely on these tools to help them decide and make judgment calls. And there's videos that joke about this, where it's a skit of someone that is talking to his friend, and his friend asks him a question and he can't answer it. He's got to ask the AI app every question that the friend's asking to answer it on his behalf. But that's not super far away from reality. And that's the big danger of these tools, is that, first of all, you outsource your thinking to an AI or a large language model. And then secondly, you don't know if that AI tool is steering you a certain way to get to a certain answer that you may not arrive at by yourself. So when you outsource critical thinking and decision making to LLMs and AI tools, it really diminishes your ability to first influence that decision. And then secondly, I think there's an accountability challenge now as well. And we're starting to see this in the business world, when an AI makes a decision and the decision was not the right decision, and if there's a consequence to that decision, whether it's financial or reputational or something else happens, who is responsible? Is it the AI provider or the AI company, or is it the human operator? Even though the human operator was not the one that made the decision or made that judgment call. So I think critical thinking being outsourced to machines is dangerous in the long run. And we have to be very mindful that we keep the human in the loop mentality. So we don't outsource decision making and judgment calls, but we can absolutely have a brainstorming partner. And
Yeah.
I think that's a skill for the future, is the ability to make decisions and judgment calls. If you can do that, you're going to be well ahead of others.
I agree. I think there are challenges there's great advancements, but we talked about in previous podcasts. It's the data. Like if you generally ask a question to LM that's current, let's say current events or something like that. What's his data source? Well, most likely it's going to browse the internet and find information. A lot of it is going to be things on Reddit. Now, I'm not saying that information on Reddit isn't accurate by any means, but there's a lot of questionable information out there sometimes. And so you're going to get exactly that. You're going to be influenced. And if you're not able to have critical thinking and say, wait a second, this doesn't make sense, I'm going to really ask it and I'm going to challenge it, may fall you're going to have trouble. Same thing with LLMs. They're not sometimes definitive. Now, if you're asking a scientific question, it'll tell you 100% probably most likely inaccurate information. But if you give it something that is judgmental of, let's say, snap a picture and ask it, hey, does this hat look good on me? It'll probably try to peel up and say, yes, it looks great. And you send it to your friends and you'll be like, what were you thinking?
Right. Yeah.
What are you trying to do? I've seen some funny stuff on social media where, a guy puts a little baby hat on and says, hey, can I wear that? And the LLM says, yeah, you look great. Go out in it. It's stylish, be confident, and gives it all the prompts to feel great. Well, that would be an example where you really want to think through that. And then the last thing I would say is that I think folks are becoming reliant on it so much that what do you do when you don't have access to it?
Exactly.
I mean, you're going to be in a business meeting, and if you don't know your subject well enough, it's going to be a tough meeting.
How many people's brains turn off when there's Anthropic or OpenAI outages? You just see it on Twitter,
Yeah.
on social media. People are like, I can't do any work. Yeah,
Yeah.
because we're outsourcing thinking to these
Yeah.
LLMs. And that's dangerous. You can have offline models as well. But man, that requires some beefy horsepower locally to do any type
Yeah,
of reasonably fast inference. So Alex, you're totally right. And I think the more we get embedded into these tools, the more we become dependent on them. And it becomes very challenging to exist without it.
So if someone today is watching or listening and they're just, again, I want to hit all aspects of our audience, because we have those that are super experts in this field, and there's some that are just dabbling. I have a friend of mine that watches our podcast, and he goes, about halfway through, I'm totally lost. I don't know what you're talking about, but it's interesting. So we've got the whole gambit that are listening and watching to these podcasts. So for somebody who's just kind of getting started in this, what's something that you guys would say that they should do to start really finding a tool that works for them, that they can use on a semi-regular basis?
When you can get the Claude app on your phone and start using it there, that's kind of my daily driver if I'm out and about and need information. Well, that's a good place to start.
Yeah. What kind of information do you ask it throughout the day? Just maybe a brief example.
Just stuff that I run into, like if we're at dinner and somebody wants to know what the first movie was that was ever made, I get fast and accurate results versus, when I used to just Google things. If I find myself not Googling anymore, I'll ask Claude first a lot of times.
I'm a big fan of Gemini right now, especially for everyone that's listening. You probably have a Gmail address that has all your email. You're probably watching YouTube, probably accessing Google Docs. Gemini has native integration into that if you have a paid subscription to it. So if you want to have Gemini access your Google email or other information, it's out of the box. And I shared that example a couple of episodes ago where I talked about my trip planning to London that's happening in a couple of weeks. And I used Gemini because Gemini fully understood my calendar, my personal calendar, my Gmail, my itinerary for my flights, the hotels where we're going to be staying. And that's an easier way. Not saying that Claude and Anthropic can't do it, there's a little bit of an extra step there. But I'm a huge fan of Gemini, and just jumping in, using the tool, and just having some repetition, I think creates that muscle so that you can become at least up to speed on basic AI usage, because I believe that's some fluency that everyone's going to have to learn in the next 6 months.
Yeah, that's good points. I'm kind of on a personal level, I'm kind of agnostic. I paid subscription to ChatGPT for a long time, and that I just, like I mentioned earlier episodes, I just love the image part of being able to take a picture and it telling me if this is, what this is, or explanation or finding information. It's super helpful and transformative. So I would advise anyone, no matter which LLM you're going to pick, get a free version. I'll use it on a personal level. Word of caution, don't get carried away. There's a statistic out there that, some insane amount of people use it as a personal companion, and maybe that's what you need, but just be wary that, it's not a real human on the other side. So just don't go overboard in asking, all life advice questions. Play around with it. You'll be surprised.
All right, that's a wrap on today's episode. It is Prompt First, Ask Later. Thanks everybody for being here. Again, you can find out all about us at spej.ai, or you can click on the link in the description below to watch more of our podcast videos and find out more about AI and what it's doing and where it's going. So we'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.
See you, everyone.